Is this really the best we can do? I mean, really? I'm going to review every book on this year's Booker Prize Longlist. But I'm going to warn you, this is not going to be pretty. I'm reviewing these books alphabetically by the author's last name. At the end, I guess I'm going to predict a shortlist, but that's going to be hard to fill out, and a winner. And I'll give you my final thoughts. I'm pretty much foreshadowing them right now. But I'm going to start my reviews by contradicting all the negative foreshadowing I've already begun. Love Forms by Claire Adam. Love Forms is the story of Dawn, who at 58 receives an email from an Italian woman who may or may not be her missing daughter. At 16, Dawn got on board a boat from Trinidad and Tobago towards Venezuela, where she gave birth to a daughter, handed over to some nuns, and left. 40 years later, she is living in the UK and regularly travels back to her home to visit her mother. Still, when she mentions her daughter, it creates tension between them. This is a novel that oscillates back and forth in time, centered around Dawn at 58, wondering if it is too soon to request a DNA test. Obviously, there are large chunks when Dawn is 16 as well, but we get several parts of her life in between. I love the exploration of her drive to become a doctor and eventually giving it up because her husband was one too, and they had children, and who would look after them? It really was an intelligent thing to juxtapose against the stigma around giving up a child. There's a lot in here around choices and roles, the patriarchy and the sacrifices made for motherhood. Another theme I enjoyed was Dawn being a light-skinned Trinidadian with a Trinidadian accent and the stigma that came with that accent and living in the UK. The confusion that caused as well. Racism is not a singular experience. It's not the same for all people, and I don't think it was particularly bad for Dawn, but her accent did carry around a lot of stigma, a lot of prejudice. People did treat her different. She did suffer from racism, but in a different way you would imagine to somebody who is black. We all need to read a variety of experiences because not everybody's experience is the same. Of course, motherhood, adoption, reconnection, the absence of a particular child from your life, the question of what might have been, these are the central themes explored in this novel. There is nothing particularly revolutionary said on these issues, but it is an emotionally nuanced and sophisticated character-led exploration of these topics. The plot is in some respects really simple, but it is also somehow complex too. It all climaxes on the results of the DNA test, but as we wait for the results, we learn and appreciate the complexities of both a positive and a negative result, whether Dawn has found her long-lost missing daughter or whether she is just another woman that gave her false hope for a little bit. We also learn how searching for her daughter is an unhealthy obsession that she wishes she could let go of but cannot. There is a relationship she has built with this woman from Italy, an uneasy friendship, a friendship which they will have to pretend was always more than what it was, or a friendship that they'll have to pretend never existed. What a weird thing to change based on the results of a arbitrary DNA test. And I guess that is asking the question, what is family? The characters and settings created in this novel are brilliantly executed. By some distance, this novel is the best at both characters and setting on the long list, hands down. But this is much more of a woman's prize style book, emotionally complex rather than intellectually rigorous. And there are other books doing this sort of literature better than Love Forms. I still think that this is the sort of book that I'm really happy to read. There's no real area of criticisms I have. Everything is good, but it needed something a little bit spicy, explosive, a little bit exciting or different to lift this to the amazing level. Good, not amazing. I'm still really happy to recommend this novel quite highly. And as a side note, I noticed that Claire Adams' first novel was published by Sarah Jessica Parker's imprint. So for all the hate she has got at being on the prize, she's probably the judge pushing for this author. She's probably responsible for at least bringing this author to the attention of the other judges and getting this author on the long list. So maybe with the undoubted quality of this book and what we're about to see, maybe we needed more SJP influence on this year's long list. The South by Tash Aw. Set somewhere in, I believe, Malaysia, but really it doesn't matter. It could be anywhere. This is a story of a family returning to their roots and inheriting a house nobody wanted, while a young gay man falls in love for the first time. This novel is slow, it is overwritten, it's boring, it's really boring. I'm going to say that a lot. This novel was really boring. It was without characters, setting, or plot. I mean, it's a novel called The South. It is about moving to a new place, and it has no setting constructed in it. It has no place or point of view. The point of view of the narrative changes too much, causing the reader to become lost, something which is certainly not helped by the novel's lack of suspense, emotion, or intellectual stimulation. And it's really not helped by the lack of character construction when you switch characters and you can't even tell. There are little fragments of tenderness in this novel. Jay's desire to have his lovemaking be slow and tender, and then, well, you know, he's 17. These things happen. Or his desire to be clean for his lover, only for Shang to remain musky. But these little moments are not backed up. It's like being promised a meal and then receiving it one tic-tac at a time. And then at the end of your 8-hour degustation, all you want to do is hurt the chef for buying such unreasonably sized plates. The inexperience and the disparity within the relationships at points could have been a touching subject if it were at all explored. If this novel had characters to build the themes upon, it could have had themes. If the prose was up to the standards required. If a bull had tits, it would need milking. If this book was good, it might be good. This is ultimately the issue with the entire long list. This novel is sparse. It has both the ambition and the structure of a loose stool. And this is the first of 4 planned novels, is baffling. I'm a big advocate of DNFing a book if you're not enjoying it. But Tash, if you're watching this, it's alright to DNF writing a series as well. And this is by no means the worst book on the long list. I mean, quality-wise, it really should be, but this long list also contains One Boat by Jonathan Buckley. And if you're planning to read this book, let me tell you something I don't think you or anybody else will realise, or if they do, they'll easily forget it. The protagonist's name is Teresa. She is apparently a woman, although I am actually going off her name and nothing else. Set in Greece. You know it's Greece because there are random Greek words in it. Sadly, that's really all we have to go off. Teresa is visiting Greece for the second time and meets all the people she met the first time. What a coincidence. Most of whom are tediously boring and won't be included in this review, because that's called editing out the shit bits, something this author and most of the authors on this long list need to learn about. And let me tell you something of little consequence, but that just upset me about this book. At some point, Teresa was reading the Odyssey, and it brings up this thought of returning somewhere. And yes, Teresa did return to Greece, but after 9 years. And I mean, if you're going to reference a book, read it. Make it 20 years, or don't bother including it. And I know ultimately this doesn't really matter, but it really is nails down a chalkboard. It really is a sign of an author who can't get his book to work. And this sort of annoying mistake, I mean, it's tempting me to beat my head against a solid object in the hope of forgetting this fact. but at least this book warns of the impact of blunt force trauma. I didn't finish this book. I was almost halfway through it when I gave up. In that time, the only character that was remotely interesting was this man who lost his young male relative of some variety after he was punched in the face at maybe a nightclub and died possibly on the spot. I've got a hunch it was his nephew, so we're going to assume it's nephew for the rest of the review. The killer was charged with manslaughter and got out on good behaviour. Unfortunately, the characters are so weak that the humanity of the situation has really been removed. Was the uncle grieving? Was he angry? I have no idea. This is the most lacking novel to make the book a long list in a long time, and that's saying a lot. Let me clarify that. There have been worse novels on the long list, but not one so lacking in substance. The complete lack of an attempt at character construction makes it hard to build the rest of the novel on. But honestly, this author really isn't trying anything thematically new, complex, or nuanced either. I have no idea what the judges thought they were doing longlisting this book. Then I read an online review, and I think that this probably sums up this book really well. This is what Booker judges do when they want to longlist Rachel Cusk, but she hasn't released a novel. A comparison to Rachel Cusk is quite complimentary to Jonathan Buckle's novel. I'd say this was the book that Rachel Cusk would write if somebody shot her with a horse tranquilizer. And my opinion of Rachel Cusk's novels is not exactly high either. Universality by Natasha Brown. Now, I have already reviewed this prior to the long list being announced, and I called this my most disappointing read of 2025 to date. I was thrilled when this was long listed. A man is murdered at a rave, bludgeoned to death with a gold bar. I love that metaphor. But that is where the novel goes off the rails for me, and unfortunately for Natasha Brown, it's pretty early on in it. A journalist starts interviewing people, and we try to understand the motives and the situations around this murder, and not just the murder, but this group of anarchists who live on the farm where the murder took place. There has been a lot of books lately that include a biased or an immoral journalist being critical of our media, and this is another one of those books. It's not really enough to say the media is biased. Of course it is. Everything is biased. Everybody talking to you is biased. It's not a particularly revolutionary thing to say the media is biased. In fact, it's not particularly revolutionary to say that they're malicious in their biasness, that they are not trying to act impartially, that they are trying to, be a kingmaker or whatever you want to call whoever becomes president or whatever of a country. What is lacking from this novel is the nuance in the discussion. This is missing because our journalist isn't a fully constructed character. I am sure Brown has a fantastic idea of who her characters are, but she has really rushed their construction in an attempt to make this novel fast-paced, and it has not come across on the page. Authors, please, write books like you make love, at a pace appropriate to the development of the scene and the characters involved. If in doubt, slow down, repeat, give everybody involved a little bit of extra attention. Don't just plough on through, collect your money and leave, leaving the reader feeling confused and unsatisfied. This novel is a critique of power in our society. It is not hard to agree with what Natasha Brown is saying, but it's not challenging. She's not dropping the mic at any point. She doesn't create a connection with her characters. She can't build emotions like she did in Assembly. She has really limited what this book can do. She is tackling a topic adjacent to what she tackled in Assembly, but it is simply more basic than her last novel. She doesn't have any of the complexity of her characters in this novel, and she doesn't have the intersections of identity her last book had. To repeat the words you're going to be sick of hearing me say pretty soon, this book is too sparse to be a good book. It is too simple. It is without character construction or plot. It is with a very basic exploration of the themes. This novel is an example of why authors shouldn't rush into their second book. And it wouldn't be hard to argue that this is an example of a prize failing to award a debut author with an incredible book and then trying to fix that by awarding the author something with their follow-up novel. A book that is of significantly less quality than their debut. Flashlight by Susan Choi. Initially, I was actually really loving this book when I was reading, but it just kept going and going and going, and really it had a complete lack of focus. The 464 pages of it felt like it was so many more. This is at least a 700 or even an 800 page book. A girl, Louisa, goes out with her dad and then her memory fails and she wakes up with a flashlight on a beach at night and he has disappeared. This is a book taking place between Korea, Japan and the USA. It is a family saga that jumps around in time. Cirque, our missing father, was raised in Japanese Korea and felt more Japanese than Korean, not even being able to read Korean and using a Japanese name. He was feeling very out of place when Korea was liberated from Japan at the end of the Second World War, and suddenly the ban on Korean language was over. Suddenly he went from top of the class to illiterate. Now, I really enjoyed this interesting conversation around identity, the suppression of a people, the power of language. Although, and I'm about to say it again, this was a little raw and sparse and underexplored. Anna Louisa's mother is our third major character. Large chunks of this novel are written from her points of view, mostly taking place after the flashlight incident, while Cirque's narratives are predominantly from his childhood, which does create a bit of a disconnect, and this is further imbalanced by Louisa being sort of a side character in both of their stories. She is the thing that best links them, but she is of completely different age. Her parents have different feelings about her, and she is seen differently by them. There is just this big disjoint in her character as we see these two different perspectives that are so separated. We needed a little more from Louisa's point of view to really adequately understand her. And what initially starts out as a family saga intermittently moves into a sort of spy mystery novel. I wasn't convinced. It took me out of the story. It was disconnected from the rest of the book. The plot is clunky and granular to the point of appearing to be made out of Lego blocks. It really could be a Minecraft character. It's a plot that is adding olives to a mixed berry smoothie, two things that can be delicious on their own but should never be blended together. The character creation was frustrating. Initially, I'm seeing, particularly in Cirque, this complex character who is confused about whether he is Japanese or Korean. But this is not included to build him as a character. These events, these motivations exist to force the plot. Anna being disabled is similar. Initially, you see this woman frustrated by the loss of the use of her legs and her mobility, and not knowing why, what is happening, blaming herself for her illness. Had this not have also been an element to push the plot forward, it would have felt sincere. Had we had explored it after the plot was pushed forward, we could have felt it was sincere. But ultimately, this was used to create this unlikely friendship Anna has. I've not mentioned Tobias and his son, who was never really part of the family and never really part of this book, although he did take up a lot of pages. Thematically, this is sprawling and lacks focus. The themes are all over the place and separate from each other. They simply do not intersect. The setting is a struggle too. When a novel is set in 3 countries, a good way of examining the quality of the setting is to ask, can I tell where they are right now? What clues do I have? Never did I feel like I knew where we were intuitively. The characters really dominate the setting. No, the characters are flat out creating the setting, and it feels like the wrong place. It feels very USA when we have our North American characters. Fortunately, this is a book that is much more enjoyable to read than it is well executed, which is really fortunate because it is quite poorly constructed. You know how when you read a really, really good book, sometimes it can start off as just okay, and then you read a little bit more and it's kind of good, and then it's proper good, and it just keeps getting better and better, and then suddenly it's the best book you've read all year. This is the opposite, and it only started at kind of good. It just kept falling away. Ideas were left half discussed, and inefficient prose made everything take longer than it really needed to be. It just got worse and worse and more boring. A poorly constructed, disjointed mess, whose only saving grace is that it had the potential to be a much better novel, and I was kind of hoping that it would be. The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny by Kiran Desai. Every year the Booker Prize does this. Never do they think they should bother changing their dates or considering readers at all. This book is not going to be released for another 6 weeks. I have been ignored when I've requested an ARC, so I haven't been able to read it. This is a sales and marketing 101 mistake. This is really basic. The purpose of a book prize is to promote books. In the Booker's case, it is allegedly the best 13 books of the last 12 months. If you're trying to promote books, if you're trying to increase sales, here's a big tip that any marketer will give you. Put as few obstacles between the book and the reader as possible. Move the key day back a month. Shorten the eligibility window to 50 weeks for the next couple of years. Do anything but find a way to make sure the books on the long list are available for readers who want to read them. It lacks consideration. That all said, I'm relieved I wasn't granted an ARC for this book. My only previous experience of Kiran Desai is The Inheritance of Loss, and it was one of the worst books I read that year. It was frankly terrible, and it is a book that contains a lot of the same flaws as basically all of the rubbish on this year's long list. It lacks focus. It has no character construction. It says very little with way too many words. It has ill-explored themes. It's, wait for it, sparse. So I'm pretty happy to dodge her new release, which means, statistically, it's probably going to win. Honestly, it wouldn't actually need to be that good to win as well. And frankly, at this stage, I'm thinking being good would be a disadvantage to a book's chance of winning this prize this year. Moving along, Auditions by Katie Kitamura. Kitamura is an interesting and challenging author. Every time I've read one of her books, I feel like I'm missing something and I need to reread it to fully appreciate it. Yet I always find her work imaginative and thought-provoking. An elegant woman in her early 50s and an attractive late 20s man meet at a restaurant for lunch. What is their relationship? Are they clandestine lovers, mother and son, professional actors meeting for lunch? Are they friends, muse and mentor? Then suddenly, halfway through this book, it completely changes. It really does feel like we've moved to a completely different universe. It's like all the characters are actors, and suddenly what they are playing is a completely different role. But I guess then again, our 2 main characters are actors. So maybe the question is one of these parts of the novel real life and the other a play or a movie? Maybe they're both plays. maybe none of them are plays. This is a novel exploring the different roles we play, and along the way looking at relationship, love, exploitations, the sacrifices we make for the people we love, and the assumptions we make about people. This is a novel that really would benefit from being reread. There is a lot of little things that I was starting to see at the end of the novel that I wasn't able to see at the start because I wasn't quite sure what the book was doing when I was reading the beginning of this novel. When the roles in the novel change, when we go from part 1 to part 2, it is really abrupt, and it makes things challenging to understand. Not challenging to follow. It is an easy book to follow, but challenging to understand. And I really love my literary fiction like that. I feel lost when I'm struggling to follow events. While struggling to understand themes, I'm much more comfortable with not knowing that, with puzzling that out, with testing theories and letting the author indulge me. It encourages me to sit and think, to come up with theories, and I just think that that is wonderful. That the two parts are really disjointed is both a blessing and a curse. It is the key to start pondering the themes, the parts we play. Without that, the novel wouldn't work. But it is also jarring. It means the character building is at best wacky. I mean, it is a novel that is challenging the roles of characters in a novel, so of course it is going to be a little bit wacky. But also, as somebody who considers themselves a character reader, I can't say it was completely enjoyable to read. But it falls into the curse of being an experimental novel. It might just be a little bit too jarring to be enjoyed by a lot of readers. The characters are uneasy, and can an author ever create a connective feel with the characters under such circumstances where they completely change who they are? Some people are going to love this, some people are going to very strongly disagree with those people. Personally, I can see both camps. A really interesting book, but I'm not sure it's an entirely successful one. Still, I am much more in the like camp than I am in the dislike camp. Definitely one of the best books on the long list, but that's not really saying a lot. The Rest of Our Lives by Ben Markovits. This is another book that I DNF'd, but credit to Markovits, because I felt passionately about this novel. I hated it, but he did elicit an emotion in me, which is more than I can say about the mediocre, sub-average nothingness of a lot of this long list. A man's wife cheated on him over a decade ago, and he takes his youngest daughter to college, and then decides that he's not going to come home. This has been called an all fours, but for men, because what we really need right now is to take one of the worst books in living memory and to replace one of its only good point, the exploration of an underexplored demographic, menopausal woman, and to replace that with a sooky, privileged man whose wife once cheated on him with a guy with a stupid name. And while Miranda July's protagonist is overly emotional, with completely over-the-top reactions to basically everything, Markovits has replaced it with a man who is emotionally stunted, who is completely passive in most scenes, whose actions I think are even a mystery to himself. Our protagonist is a man who is struggling to fit into the world, who has assumed everybody agrees with him, and as he puts it, is constantly discovering he is on the wrong side of history. He talks about the owner of a sports team creating a hostile environment to work in because he used the N-word 5 times over 20 years, and completely demonstrates that he doesn't really know what's going on because he fails to understand why that isn't cool, and also he gives you enough details so that you know he doesn't really have a clue what's happening. At another point, he is pondering his daughter's choice of music as he takes her to university. She puts on Tainted Love, and he asserts why he thinks she likes the song, essentially saying that it's daggy enough for her to say that she ironically likes it. There is a lot of telling instead of showing going on. And it's so that Markovits can create a narrator that is awkwardly out of touch with the world. His confident incorrectness, his lack of willingness to talk about issues or even exist, his lack of vulnerability. I want to slap him and yell, either toughen the fuck up or have a good cry, but stop being a boring twat. He is so utterly unlikable and out of touch that I just couldn't stand spending another 100 pages with him. Honestly, I'm pretty sure his family would be better off if he never came home, and his complete apathy to the world around him makes him an impossible character to connect with. The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller. This book has been completely misadvertised. It is not about two families struggling to survive a particularly cold winter. Yes, that is there, but this book is really about an affair. And also, as the publisher puts it on the back of this book, this is a novel about the minutiae of life. What a riveting topic the minutiae of life is. Just say it's lacking in substance. Nothing of note happens in this book. At some point, there was a blowjob, and at another point, a boy is instructed to hit the crap out of a car with a cricket bat while the driver is holed up with a bow and arrow. But it's 365 pages long, and I'm really not sure what Andrew Miller did with the other 360 pages. This is what happens when you try to be Claire Keegan, but you have a fraction of her talent, can't write prose, fail to create an emotional connection with your characters, and include a completely unnecessary 300-odd pages of text in your novel. Characters in this book are not even remotely constructed. I know I'm repeating myself in these reviews, but a character is more than a name, age and job title. In this novel, it's also about whether their downstairs uglies point inwards or outwards. There are 4 characters here, and honestly, I could not tell the women apart. I don't feel like the men were that dissimilar either. Don't think I'm criticising Andrew Miller for being one of these authors who can't write women. He also can't write men. And for a novel that is meant to be about a particularly cold winter, doesn't build a setting, which is weird because most of this novel is descriptions of one thing or another. No substance, no world building, all the descriptions are side notes. It's really like if I randomly started to talk about the texture of hummus in this review. You've come here for a book review, not to find out that the best hummus has a lot of garlic in it and ice added at the blending stage. Really, I'm just talking about hummus to make you think that there's some substance in this review because it's very hard to review a book about nothing. There's only so much I can say about a novel that has no plots, is characterless, settingless, and themeless before you start to ponder the virtues of hummus. You can always add more lemon juice, but you can't take it out. The prose is pedestrian, it lacks focus, but it's clear that this element of the novel has had the most effort put into it. I can see some people walking away from this and saying, he can write beautifully. I don't agree with that, but I'm happy to agree to disagree on those things. Let's take a break from this relentless negativity and talk about one of the few books with actual merit on this year's long list. Let's discuss Endling by Reva. A bizarre novel, a truly bizarre novel. Reva is a snail scientist and has a mobile science lab, hunting the countryside for rare breeds of snails. She funds her research by dating men, making use of the Ukrainian marriage industry that attracts men who thinks they will find a submissive, traditional wife. Reva has no intention of ever marrying one of these men. Not because she's a feminist, not because she has respect for herself, not for any reason such as that. She's asexual, and her only real interest is snails. Sisters Natsia and Sol also work in the marriage industry, daughters of a famous protester against said industry who has recently gone missing. Natsia convinces Sol to join her on a stunt, the kidnapping of 10 bachelors looking for love. The only issue is that to kidnap the 10 men, they need a large vehicle, and hence they asked Reva to join them. One of my favourite bits of this novel is the seriousness that the characters take, some of the absolute absurdity that Reva introduces into this book. Upon being asked to join the kidnapping of 10 men, Reva asks if they've done a proper risk assessment and asks for the paperwork to be submitted before she makes her final decision. And it is not until Natsia submits the correct paperwork to her that she agrees to join in the stunt and allow them to borrow her science vehicle. Pavel is one of the 10 bachelors who are eventually kidnapped. Instead of dreaming of taking a Ukrainian bride home to be his wife, he's dreaming of moving to Ukraine to find himself his new submissive trad wife. Because people in the Ukraine marriage industry definitely want to stay in the country, don't they? Lefty is a snail whose shell goes the wrong way. Reva, complete with kidnapped men and angry activist women in tow, wants to find Lefty a mate, and when one of them is sighted, everybody's plans start to go wrong as she veers across the country. I am sure that this was going to be a very good, fast novel. Funny, sarcastic, and making commentary about how Westerners view other countries through rose-tinted glasses. But then Russia invaded the Ukraine, and Reva introduces that into her novel. It became the focus, and it's quite jarring. And honestly, it wasn't my favourite thing to read, but it represents how jarring war is, how suddenly things change, how meaningless a lot of our struggles are in the face of war. Also, there are our kidnapped bachelors who need to be informed of the war, and who by this time have figured out that their kidnapping was all just a scam to steal their mobile phones. The commentary on facts and misinformation with these men is absolutely priceless. Having been convinced that they're victims of a phone theft scan, everything they see is suddenly easily explainable by that particular lie. At one point, Pavel actually escapes and sees dead bodies. He sees conflicts, and he becomes convinced that the war is actually taking place. When he returns, the men ask him what is actually happening. Seeing that the men are so convinced of their lie and may consider him suddenly on the side of the women, he decides to lie and to say the war isn't real. And I'm just kind of like, if all of your mates think COVID is a hoax, is it just easier to go along with them and not rock the boat? But this is priceless. I mean, I've been Pavel, who hasn't had the realization while talking to somebody that they're a fool, followed by the thought of, I'm at work, I can't just call them a fool, that would be inappropriate. I don't want to create conflict. Just nod. There's quite a lot going on here, and then Maria Reva introduces herself as a meta character, which is extra weird because surely Reva is, well, at least a little bit inspired by her. Suddenly there is a need in the plot to evacuate Reva's real life grandfather from the Ukraine, and scenes are repeated with different characters. This is all just like a repeat of Kitamura's question around what is a character in a novel. It is experimental writing asking the same questions, and I think this is done much better than Kitamura. It is less jarring, even as you go into this wackiness. I think one of the things that is so telling about the overall quality of the Longlist is that the two novels that question what a character is, that experiment with the form of characters, are, with the exception of Love Forms and the as yet unreviewed Seascraper, the best formed characters on the entire Longlist. Plot-wise, this book is really quite a bit of fun. Best plot on the long list, which I guess is a little like saying it didn't take a step backwards when it was asked to volunteer, but nonetheless I enjoyed the plot. It is a novel not taking itself too seriously, but at the same time providing a serious analysis of important and sensitive issues, questioning the way information and news is broadcast to the West. Personally, there's a little bit too much going on and I would have preferred a little bit more focus. But this doesn't detract from the overall quality of the book. I don't think the original plan was to include the war with Russia in this novel, but Reva started writing this before the war, and when that happened, it creates this rabbit hole of thoughts. From the emotional one about having your grandfather stuck in a war zone to the meta ones about the impact of world events on writing a book, or the question of what is happening to all the other issues at this time when suddenly the world feels like it's stopped because of a war. This is a really exceptional book and a perfect book to read with somebody else or as part of a book club. This was my Patreon book club's choice for July, so I'll take the chance to thank them for all of their support. But it really is a good novel when people can take different things out of the book, and when you discuss with people what they saw, you learn things from their perspective. It really adds and illuminates to your experience. And that, for me, is why this is the ideal book club novel. A book that gets better after it has been discussed. Endling really does fit that bill. And I know I said I'd do this at the end, but this is the only book on the long list that I think has the quality to win the best book of the year, that sort of award. While I think the judges need to apologise for this long list, they can make things a small bit better by announcing Endling the winner. Flesh by David Szalay, a cradle-to-grave story about Hungarian man Istvan, who begins his life in Hungary, but for much of his life lives in London. A married woman at 40 asks Istvan, who was about 15 at the time, to help her with her errands. And you know how these things happen. He's carrying her shopping in, he's putting away the apples, they have sex. Really mechanical and emotionless sex. I mean, actually, the sex is clearly not emotionless. That's just the prose used to describe it. The sex clearly does have an impact on Istvan. So that sort of screams that if you're going to write a sex scene, make sure you can write one. The whole affair is written in this really matter-of-fact style. You would think that it was an everyday occurrence. We never find out why this woman seduced Istvan. And I mean, maybe that's a little bit forgivable because she's not our narrator. But frankly, we don't even really understand what Istvan is getting out of this clandestine relationship either. He's actually repulsed by her at the beginning of the book. Although, by the end of the affair, he's definitely changed his mind on how he feels about her. Now, this is just the beginning of the book. And she is one of several women, all who are about 40, that Istvan has sex with over the years. The sex scenes are really, really bad. There's so little going on. It really is the on-page equivalent of starfishing it. I'm sorry, I just can't get over it. This book would have been considerably better if all the sex scenes were simply fade to black. And the sex is like a metaphor for the entire book. It would have been better if the entire book was fade to black. That's actually really unfair. But we don't get emotions from Istvan at any point in this novel, with one exception. When our initial woman breaks up with him. This is the only time Szalay gives us a hint of what Istvan is feeling. Later in this novel, some pretty massive things happen to him. But Istvan appears kind of like a man who turns away from you at a funeral so you can't see him cry. Look, I'm being really unfair here. This is actually a novel about the difficulties of articulating and expressing your emotions, the clumsiness of feeling, and the fraughtness of masculinity. Of course, the emotional writing is stunted. That's actually the point of the book. I am, however, bored with men writing about the struggles of masculinity. Men, if you're struggling with masculinity, here's all you need to know. Stop worrying about being a man and start trying to be yourself. You don't need to identify as a man if that doesn't fit you. I mean, I guess that's probably quite a big thing to say, quite a big step to take. But seriously, if you're struggling to be a man, it's either because you're not one or because your definition of a man is so skewed, biased, and incorrect it needs to be updated. You're probably actually basing your opinion on what a man is by what you think other men think a man is. Stop trying to define masculinity by what you think other people think and just be yourself. And if that is a struggle for you, do yourself a favor and go to therapy. The themes and the character construction, the way it's done, you can either have one or the other. It doesn't work. It's intentional. It's an obstacle. And it's not going to make a good reading experience. And if you're going to write a novel, you need to figure out how to get around such obstacles. I'm not saying that Szalay is a bad writer. I'm saying he hasn't challenged himself to do better. He's not trying to be amazing. Character and prose-wise, this book is a complete failure. The setting doesn't come through in the slightest, but the plot, I mean, that's alright, B+ for the plot. Because Szalay has a good reason for not being vulnerable with his characters, I was more forgiving of him when I was reading it. And despite my very negative thoughts on his book and this review, I did not really hate reading this book. I didn't think it was good, but bad is not really the right word. Bland is the right word. Maybe I should call it boring and sparse again. Seascraper by Benjamin Wood. Thomas is a young man, a shanker, scraping shrimp up off the sea floor with the help of his horse and the tides of the ocean. He lives a simple life with his mum, a woman in her late 30s, who has no shortage of gentlemen admirers. He is taught his trade by his grandfather and has never known his actual father, an English teacher who died in the war, and a man hated by his grandfather for getting his daughter pregnant at 15. Thomas pines to be creative, read books, sing, play his guitar, and he also pines for Joan down the road. Coming home from a morning's hard work, Thomas finds a man, an American filmmaker who wishes to make movies and thinks that Thomas can show him the beach, the ideal setting for his movie. For his services, Thomas is offered £100. Now, this novel is set in the 60s, and that is actually quite a lot of money. I thought Wood's prose was lovely, easily the best prose on the long list. It is Wood's prose that helps instill the setting, the little words and turns of phrase, placing this very much on a northern English beach away from the big cities. The time this novel is centered in is created with mentions of Henry Ford and the use of horse for both transport and trade, and the conflict that it creates, kind of like a fax machine or a landline telephone might create a bit of conflict today. Close enough in time to us that we understand what they are used for, distant enough that it is weird to actually use one. This book is atmospheric and beautiful, but they're not the only qualities this book has. Thomas is a simple character, but he is very well drawn. He's a young man, gritty, hard-working. You can see this hardness to him, but also Woods adds a softness to him at the same time. His love for folk music, his curiosity about his father, his crush on his friend's sister. This creates this turbulence inside Thomas. It's almost like his identity is at battle with himself. There is who he actually is and who he desires to be. And there is this longingness for a friend. Edgar our American filmmaker, this friendship takes some unexpected turns, but how Thomas reacts to them is character defining. Thomas's reactions show both his faults and his virtues as a human, not as separate aspects, but existing within one another. This is a novel about our connection with our past, be that parents, trade, or landscape. It's about internal battles between creativity and practicalness, and I enjoyed how these themes were explored. I could have done with a little bit more plot and a bit more complexity, but this was the last novel from the long list that I read, and I didn't have high hopes going into it at all. But this book really is one of the few bright spots on this year's long list. One book to go, and I wish I could tell you that we are going to finish on a positive note, but that would be a lie. Misinterpretations by Ledia Xhoga. This is another really poor book. It's lacking depth, characters, and emotionally connective writing. This is a real contender for the worst book on the long list. I said when the long list was released, I thought the inclusion of this book was a joke. I am still waiting for the punchline. The punchline is my pain, isn't it? An Albanian interpreter takes on two clients who cause her some trouble. A woman who is fleeing from somebody, her ex-husband's cousin or somebody like that. And a man who needs to go to therapy, and his experiences draw up feelings and memories for our interpreter. This actually sounds like my kind of novel, so what is it that I didn't like about it? Well, I mean, it's the same thing that the French nobility didn't like about their revolution. It's the execution. Unlike the execution of a French noble, this is mundane, it meanders, it's slow and uncertain. And I'm going to flog this metaphor just a little bit more. Much like the execution of a French nobleman, there was a lot that could have been cut out, but that sadly was not. After a trip to Albania, our unnamed narrator questions what's real in her life, and we're left to question if she is real too. She's not. She's a character in a book, and what a revelation that is. Well, la-di-da. I swear, if I read another book thinking that is an interesting topic after this long list, I'm going to wish I was a French noble. Our narrator is having trouble with her mental health. I know that because I was told, but what exactly is this trouble? We're neither shown nor told. And I guess that is indeed the point. It's not by accident that she is so poorly drawn. It's intentional. It's because she acts as a conjugate for others to speak. Authors, if there's one thing I want you to learn from this long list, it's that if you have an idea for how to express your ideas and your themes that you're exploring, and that idea also makes your novel shitter, don't include it. A book consists of plot, characters, a few ideas to explore, a place, and the words you put on the page. Try to do all those things well. Just try. If you get 4 out of 5 of those aspects right, it'll be a good book. What am I, the reader, going to learn about our narrator's struggle with mental health when I don't even know what she's actually suffering from, when I don't have an example of how it impacts her and her life? Because in this book's foolishness, in its struggle to articulate a point, it decides intentionally to minimize the characters. This is an utter mess of a novel, and it's so risky. It doesn't have a protagonist. The plot is nonsense, bordering on the surreal. I assume that this was set in New York, but really it could be any big US city. There's no safety net if the risks taken don't work, and they don't work. This novel falls flat on the ground. On top of this, there are several things that make absolutely no sense. The husband is so worried about his wife at one point when she is being followed, he asks her to lock all the doors and windows, and then leaves her for nights on end because he's angry at her. What the fuck? I know they were fighting, but really? Also, what the hell is with him and that door in that scene? Then they accidentally link in with some mafia-linked person and disappear somebody without meaning it. An utterly terrible novel on so many levels. Look, that's the end of my reviews. This is easily the worst Booker longlist I have ever read. It is so bad, I think the judges really need to apologise. I'm not even joking. It's terrible. I really would struggle to make a long list this bad if I tried. And then to think that the Booker judges found something nice to say about each novel. When the judges were announced, I was so excited. Roddy Doyle, Ayobami Adebayo, Kylie Reid, 3 authors who have produced books that I loved. But it just goes to show, just because you can write a book doesn't mean that you can judge one. Overall, the books are just, I've said it too many times, sparse, and they're dull. They're really dull. Some of them are challenging the necessity of characters being part of the traditional narrative. It is an experimental group, but with a few exceptions, there's not a lot of challenges in this long list. This is a collection for insomniacs. Collectively, the themes were a complete mess, underexplored in basically every book except for Endlings, which had great themes. The best surprise for me was Seascraper. I also really enjoyed Love Forms, but that was a bit less surprising as I sort of suspected I would love that book. These 2 novels, I think, are the only books on the long list that have successfully created a character. I found Auditions thought-provoking, and I enjoyed that it was experimental, but also keeping within the very traditional narratives. So that's 4 books, and I don't think there's a single other book that is worthy of making my shortlist. If it were up for me, that would be my shortlist. But for me, clearly the next best book was Flesh. It's not as bad as the review I gave it. I maybe got worked up about this novel and the trash around it on the long list. Still, don't think it's a particularly good book. But if it were on fire, I would definitely piss on it. As far as picking a 6th book, I'm just not doing it. This long list doesn't deserve an extra book. It's really just not good enough. My final thoughts on this year's long list are as follows. In 2017, an unnamed Chinese man suffering from Hirschsprung had a 30-inch section of his colon removed, which weighed about 13 kilograms. He had been constipated for 22 years. Now that I've finished the long list, I can definitely appreciate the relief he felt.